Hello everyone, my name's Dave, and this is part 3 of a video series where I'm going to show you how to create a tower-based defense game 100% from scratch using C++ and SDL2. So far, pathfinding that allows enemy units to move towards the center of the base and make them disappear has been set up. In this part, I'm going to show you how to make them spawn at spawners on their own so that they don't have to be placed manually. Let's start by thinking about the requirements for the spawners. There needs to be a way to add the spawners to the level at any desired location. A system that gets a random spawner location must be set up because we have to know where to add a unit. Finally, there has to be a timer system that adds a predetermined number of units at the spawner locations for every round. There's a class called level, which stores all the information for things such as whether a tile is a wall or not. This is where the location for the spawners will be stored as well. There's a structure that contains all the information for each tile. One of the variables is called isWall and is of type Boolean with a default value of false, meaning that by default, every tile is empty. Of course, if it's set to true, then it means that the tile is a wall. However, it really needs to have a third option for if it's an enemy spawner or not. Therefore, I'm going to set up an enumeration called tileType with 3 enumerators: empty, wall, and enemy spawner. I'm also going to update the isWall variable in the tile structure and switch it to reflect this change. Let's go to the CPP file and fix any errors that this has caused. The isTileWall function needs to be updated to check if the type is tileTypeWall. The setTileWall function must set the type to tileTypeWall if the input is setWall. Otherwise, it will set it to tileTypeEmpty. The code that calculates the flow field distance will also need to be updated as well. Since a spawner is being added, it will need to have an image. Therefore, I'm going to go to the header file and add a new pointer called texture tile enemy spawner. It's going to be an SDL texture, just like the other textures. And I'm also going to initialize it in the constructor in the CPP file. In the draw function, I'm going to copy the code that draws the walls, paste it just above, and switch it to draw spawners. What it does is it loops through the entire level and checks each tile one by one to see if it's a spawner or not. It uses a function that I'll set up soon called getTileType. If it is, then the spawner is drawn at the specified location. I'm going to add this new function below near the isTileWall and setTileWall functions. It's going to be virtually the same as the isTileWall function. However, it's going to return the tile type rather than if it's a wall or not. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to add another function called setTileType as well. It's going to be virtually the same as the setTileWall function. However, it's going to be able to set the tile to any tile type. I'm going to add them to the header as well, and they're going to have private access because this is the only class that needs to have access to them. To clean things up, I'm going to modify the isTileWall function to use the new getTileType function by returning whether or not its tile type is a wall or not. Likewise, I'm going to modify the setTileWall function to set the tile type, but unlike before, I'm also going to check if it's an enemy spawner before the change occurs. The idea is that once the spawner locations are set, I don't want them to change. I'm now going to add the spawner locations in the constructor. Let's set it up so that there's one in every corner. To make the code look a little bit tidier, I decided to create two variables, xmax and ymax, that each represent the maximum x and y coordinates, respectively. The setTileType function is then called 4 times, with the coordinates for each corner. Okay, now let's run the game and see if all that code works or not, and make sure that nothing else got broken in the process. Okay, so the spawner images are now being drawn at the correct locations. The flow field is still calculated when the game is run. When I place some wall, the flow field gets updated, and if I try and place it on a spawner, then the spawner doesn't change. Good. If I place some units, then they all move towards the center. Let me even try to add a few at the spawners. Okay, perfect. Everything is looking good. Very nice. The next thing I'm going to do is set up some code to get a random spawner location that will be used to spawn the units automatically rather than manually, like has been done right now. I'm going to start by adding a function called getRandomEnemySpawner location to the header file, and then to the CPP file as well. Because the list of tiles stores all the spawner locations as well as a bunch of other data, I'm going to quickly create a list called listSpawnerIndices that will temporarily loop through list tiles and store any index on it that contains a spawner. I know that creating a list every time this function is called isn't necessarily the most efficient way to do this. However, the level is small, modern computers are very fast, and this way spawner locations can be stored on list tiles rather than a separate list. Once this temporary list is created, I'm going to check and see if any spawners have been found by seeing if it's empty or not. From there, I'm going to select an index at random from it and output the tile's center location. For the x, it will be index mod tile count x, and for the y, it will be index divide tile count x. Of course, I'll add half to each of these to ensure that it's in the center of the tile rather than the upper left-hand corner. In terms of the way that the index is used to calculate the x and y coordinates, this is the same process as is used to calculate the index. For example, for the setTileType function, however, it's done backwards. If for some reason there was a problem, I'm just going to output the center of the tile in the upper left corner of the level, 0.5, 0.5. Now that that's set up, let's add a timer system that adds a predetermined number of units at the spawner locations for every round. To do this, I'm going to go to the game's header file and add a new function called updateSpawnUnits if required that will end up being called in the update function. I'm going to add a few variables as well. One for spawn timer, which will count the time between each unit getting spawned. Another called round timer that will count the time in between rounds so that there's a bit of time between when one round ends and the other begins before units start spawning again. Finally, the last variable is going to be called spawnUnitCount, and it will be of type int. It's going to store how many units still need to be added in a round. I'm going to add a timer class that I've created and have used in past projects. Therefore, I'm not going to explain how it works here. However, it allows us to have a timer that counts up or down to a specified amount of time, checks if that time has been reached, and can be reset if needed. I'm going to initialize the timers that we just created in the game's constructor. The time between units spawning will be 0.25 seconds, and the time between rounds will be 5 seconds. Now let's set up the updateSpawnUnits if required function to use these. The first thing I'm going to do is update the spawn timer by counting down by the input time step, dt. I'm then going to see if the round needs to start or not. This occurs when there are no more units left in the game, no more units are being spawned, and the round timer has counted down to 0. Note that the round timer will only start counting down after the first check is passed, because otherwise it would be counting down during a round. If the round needs to start, then spawn unit count will be set to the number of units to spawn in the round, which I chose to be 15, but you can choose to be whatever you want. And then the round timer is reset. The last part I'm going to add will add a unit if needed. It will check to see if at least one unit needs to be spawned, and the spawn timer has counted down to 0. If that's the case, then a unit will be added at a random spawner location, spawn unit count will be decreased by 1, and the spawn timer will be reset. I'm going to call this new function in the update function. Also note that because it creates new units, it needs to access the renderer, and therefore the update function needs to be updated by adding the renderer as another input. Let's run the game and see what happens. Perfect. The spawners are adding units in a random order now. The units move around the walls, and when they get to the center, they disappear. Well, very nice. Everything's working properly now. I think the next thing to work on will be the art because it looks okay, but it could use some improvements. However, this is a good place to stop for this video, and I'll continue in the next one. All the source code is available on my website, link is in the description. I've also got a bunch of other games, code, and tutorials on my channel and website, as well as a course where I create a falling sand platformer game 100% from scratch. Feel free to check those out if you're interested. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one.